That day started like any other ordinary day, until everything was suddenly turned upside down. A black man walked into the courthouse, calm and composed, completely unaware that he was about to face humiliation at the hands of those sworn to uphold justice. They saw him as a nobody, boldly insulting him, stripping him of his dignity, and laughing shamelessly. But what they didn't know was that they had just laid hands on the wrong person. He wasn't just any citizen. He was the one person with the power and courage to expose the truth and bring down the rotten system they were hiding behind. What followed was a storm of justice, dark secrets being revealed, and an unexpected courtroom twist no one could have predicted. Marcus Monroe, dressed in a well-fitted navy blue suit, without the usual judge's robe, walked calmly and composed. He always believed that justice wasn't about outward authority, but about fairness and the principles in the heart of each person. Today, like any other day, he chose to blend into the crowd, not wanting to attract attention, simply hoping to enter the courtroom quietly and carry out his sacred duty. But as Marcus approached the security checkpoint, the serene atmosphere suddenly shifted. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized the man standing next to the metal detector, Hank Riker, a security guard infamous throughout Charleston for his racist attitude, always eyeing black people with disdain and suspicion. Marcus's gaze turned cautious. He was familiar with Riker's attitude, but he had never faced him directly. Today, as if by some strange fate, he could clearly see the cold, malicious glare Riker was directing at him, as though waiting for a prey to step into a trap. "Hello," Marcus spoke first, trying to keep his voice steady, but a vague unease was already stirring within him. Riker didn't respond, merely coldly scrutinizing Marcus from head to toe, then spoke with an air of authority and contempt. "Step out of line, buddy. You need a special check." The people around them immediately looked at Marcus with curious and skeptical eyes. Marcus tightened his grip on the leather briefcase in his hand. A bad feeling surged within him, but he didn't let any worry show. He simply looked Riker in the eye and asked, politely but firmly, "Is there a problem, officer?" Riker smirked with disdain, his gaze challenging, clearly enjoying the small amount of power he held. "Just follow me and you'll see." Without giving Marcus a chance to respond, Riker signaled to two other security officers to step forward and stand closely behind Marcus. The atmosphere instantly shifted to an oppressive silence that felt suffocating. Marcus took a deep breath, preparing himself for what was to come. He knew that today was no longer the peaceful day he had hoped for. It was a fateful day, one in which destiny would test the limits of his patience and dignity to the fullest. As the door to the security room clicked shut behind him, the sound of the lock echoing coldly, Marcus could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He turned around, facing directly into Riker's cold, contemptuous gaze, as the guard watched him without any hesitation. "Show me your ID," Riker ordered coldly. Marcus calmly reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his federal judge's badge, a symbol of his power and responsibility for years. But Riker merely glanced at it dismissively, not bothering to examine it properly, then threw it carelessly onto the table as if it were worthless. "Do you think this badge is a magic charm?" Riker sneered. "Here, I'm the law. Got it?" Marcus furrowed his brow, struggling to maintain composure in the face of such blatant provocation. "I have the right to know the reason for this special check," he said firmly, his voice steady. Riker stepped closer, the scent of cigarette smoke heavy in the air, as he stood inches away from Marcus, his eyes filled with malice. "The problem's with you, buddy. People like you don't come here with good intentions. We have the right to be suspicious." Marcus immediately understood the malicious intent behind those words. A wave of shame and simmering anger surged within him, but he chose to remain silent, not allowing the provocation to strip away his dignity. Before Marcus could respond, Riker signaled for two other officers to hold his arms and force him into the cold metal chair in the center of the room. Marcus instinctively felt a surge of helplessness and frustration rise in his throat as the sound of the clippers buzzing sharply in his ear filled the silence. He tried to stand, but was immediately shoved back into the chair. "You can't do this," Marcus shouted, his calm demeanor starting to crack. Riker laughed mockingly, responding in a voice as cold as ice. "I'm doing my job. Who knows what's hidden in that hair of yours?" The sound of snickering came from the two officers in the room, cowards always eager to side with those in power. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling each soft curl fall to the floor, the sounds of the humiliation cutting deep into his soul. The pain wasn't from the hair being shaved off, but from the blatant trampling of his dignity, something he had never imagined he would endure. After shaving Marcus's head, Riker stepped back, admiring his work with a cruel satisfaction. Marcus opened his eyes and looked directly at the man who had humiliated him, his gaze not one of hatred, but a deep warning. "You will pay for what you've done." Riker sneered, gesturing for the door to be opened with a dismissive wave. "Go on, Judge. You look better now." Marcus stood up, trembling slightly but maintaining his dignified posture. He walked past Riker, picked up his badge from the table and said nothing more. He knew this was just the beginning of the real fight, and he wouldn't let someone like Riker go on living in peace for another day. The heavy door slammed shut behind him, and Marcus slowly took a deep breath, trying to remain calm and not let his emotions show. He raised his hand and gently touched his now bald head, the cold sensation of his bare scalp tightening his chest even more. The humiliation he had just endured felt like a slow-burning fire inside him, but instead of succumbing, it stirred an extraordinary strength deep within him. Marcus's footsteps echoed steadily down the cold stone corridor, each step firm and resolute, as if affirming that no matter what he had to endure, he would never lose his dignity. His right hand clenched tightly around his federal judge's badge, the symbol of justice and honor he had fought his entire life to earn. Now, it felt heavier than ever, carrying the responsibility he had placed on his own shoulders, to fight back against people like Riker, to prevent them from trampling on others with impunity. Behind the now closed door, Riker stood watching Marcus walk away through a small window with a smug, contemptuous smile on his face. His rugged, hardened features were filled with satisfaction, because to him, power wasn't about justice. It was about the ability to humiliate others, to make them bow their heads before his authority. In the narrow, dark world he had created, he was the law, and Marcus was the most visible proof of that dark power. "I thought being a judge meant you could stand above everyone," Riker sneered, speaking to his two colleagues, his eyes still following Marcus as he walked further away. "In the end, he's just another black guy trying to act like he's important." His colleagues laughed along, as if Riker's cruel words were nothing more than entertainment. The security room returned to its usual cold, ruthless atmosphere, a place where conscience and humanity had long been discarded. Meanwhile, Marcus had reached the hallway leading into the courtroom. He stopped in front of a large glass window, looking at his reflection. His bald head, his hardened face, yet still bearing the faint traces of exhaustion from what had just happened. But it was in this moment that he realized he could no longer simply be a silent victim. This was not just his story. It represented so many others who had been unjustly treated by people like Riker, people enabled by a system rife with inequality. He lightly touched the badge on his chest, his resolve stronger than ever. Today was no longer just an ordinary day. Today was the day Riker, and all those who had protected and enabled him would face the consequences of their actions. Marcus's steps grew more decisive, more steadfast as he entered the courtroom, where he would use true justice, honor, and real power to confront the injustices that awaited him ahead. The courtroom door swung open, and the noisy chatter from the crowd immediately flooded Marcus's ears. Dozens of curious gazes from journalists, lawyers, and attendees turned toward the man walking silently inside. No one in the room recognized Marcus right away. With his freshly shaved head, his appearance had become unfamiliar to all those who had known him before. Marcus kept his gaze fixed straight ahead toward the bench, where his judge's robe was neatly draped over the back of the chair, still waiting for its owner to return. Every step he took was steady and deliberate, like a soldier marching into battle, ready to face whatever dangers lay ahead. He revealed no emotion or frustration, silently walking past the rows of seats, his heart burning with fierce determination. In the corner of the room, a few journalists began whispering to each other, trying to identify the mysterious man. The defense lawyers raised their eyebrows in confusion, wondering if he was a last-minute witness. The curiosity in the courtroom grew more apparent, transforming into murmurs and constant chatter. Marcus remained completely silent. When he reached the bench, he paused for a moment, taking a deep breath to steady his emotions, and then slowly donned his judge's robe. At that moment, the entire courtroom fell into stunned silence, the whispers abruptly ceasing. The skeptical gazes from earlier were now replaced with shock and awe, as they realized the man who had been humiliated at the security checkpoint was none other than Judge Marcus Monroe, the very judge presiding over this important and controversial trial. A young lawyer sitting near the bench gaped, his eyes a mix of fear and admiration, immediately grasping the gravity of the situation. Meanwhile, the reporters quickly began snapping photos and taking notes, their eyes filled with excitement and tension at this unexpected turn of events. Marcus stood at the bench, his gaze sweeping across the courtroom, deliberately pausing as his eyes landed on the section reserved for the security team and court staff, where Riker stood frozen, his face pale and drained of color, his eyes wide open in complete shock. In that moment, Riker understood more than anyone else. He had just made the most serious mistake of his life. Marcus slowly spoke, his voice steady and resonant, breaking the tense silence. This trial will begin immediately. I hope that all of you present here, especially those entrusted with the responsibility of upholding justice, fully understand what true justice means. Marcus's words were not just an announcement. They were a bold declaration, a promise that the truth would come to light and that no one could stand above the law or escape justice. The people in the courtroom were not only witnessing the return of a formidable judge, but they were also about to witness a turning point, starting right here. As soon as Marcus's statement concluded, the atmosphere in the courtroom seemed to thicken, with only the sound of the court clerk's footsteps as they approached to hand over the case files. Marcus nodded quietly in thanks, flipping through the documents with a calm demeanor. But deep within him, the flame of anger still burned, constantly reminding him of why he had to stand here today. He began the trial in a steady, authoritative voice. "Please call the first witness to the stand." A middle-aged man stepped up to the witness stand. His appearance was humble, his face etched with deep lines from years of hard labor, and his eyes held an undeniable pain that couldn't be hidden. He placed his trembling hand on the Bible and swore in a choked voice, "I swear to tell the whole truth." Marcus gestured gently for him to begin his story. The man took a deep breath, his voice trembling as he recalled the painful memories. "Your Honor, My son is only 17 years old. He was participating in a peaceful protest demanding justice for those who were victims of police discrimination. Yet he was brutally beaten by the officers. They shoved his head down into the ground, used their knees to press heavily on his neck until he passed out, and had to be hospitalized in critical condition. The courtroom fell into complete silence, the only sound being the man's choked recounting of his pain. Marcus listened intently, not missing a single detail. Inside, a new wave of fury surged, not just because of the heartbreaking story, but because the very individuals meant to uphold the law were abusing their power so mercilessly. Marcus's gaze inadvertently drifted to the corner of the courtroom, where Riker was standing against the wall. At this moment, Riker no longer had the smugness he once carried. His face was ashen, his eyes darting nervously, clearly filled with unease. Marcus knew that Riker did not fear the law, he only feared the day when his past crimes would be brought to light. The trial continued with other witnesses stepping up, recounting systematic police oppression. Each story was heartbreakingly similar. The victims were innocent, but their only crime was their skin color, making them targets of violence and injustice. Marcus silently took notes on each testimony, trying to maintain a calm expression, though inside, a storm was raging. When a defense attorney stood up, attempting a feeble defense of the police's actions, Marcus immediately interrupted, his voice firm yet polite. "We are not here to discuss personal reasons or vague assumptions. We are judging based on truth and justice. I request that you focus on the factual evidence." The defense attorney quickly sat down, his face flushed with confusion and helplessness. Riker, watching from the corner of the room, grew even more anxious as he witnessed Marcus handling the trial with authority and precision. He had never encountered anyone like Marcus, a person who could not be swayed by threats or external power. Finally, Marcus looked up, meeting Riker's gaze once again. His eyes didn't need words. They clearly conveyed a message that sent a chill down Riker's spine. Today is just the beginning. You will not escape justice. Riker began retreating further into the shadowy corner of the room, trying to avoid the sharp, commanding gaze of Marcus. But he knew, deep down, that real power no longer rested in his hands. It now belonged to the man he had just humiliated, the man who now held the gavel of justice firmly in his hands in the center of the courtroom. As the testimonies concluded, Marcus slowly closed the case files on the table, his sharp gaze landing precisely where Riker was trying to hide in the corner of the room. He paused for a brief moment, as if weighing something important, then suddenly spoke in a clear, powerful voice. "The court will take a brief recess. Before we continue, I have an issue that needs to be addressed." The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. No one dared to move or make a sound, as Marcus's stern gaze fixed on Riker, each word he spoke resonating with authority. "Security Officer Hank Riker, please step forward." Riker flinched, panic flashing across his face as he looked around, seemingly searching for some form of desperate help. His face turned a pale gray, and his legs seemed unsteady, as every pair of eyes in the room focused on him. Marcus waited patiently, his cold stare never leaving Riker, not for a second. Finally, under the suffocating pressure of the silence, Riker reluctantly took slow, shaky steps toward the witness stand, his hands trembling, unable to hide the fear rising within him. Marcus spoke again, his voice cold but full of power. "In front of this entire courtroom, please confirm your actions earlier today at the security checkpoint. What did you do to me?" Riker swallowed hard, struggling to speak, his voice trembling and weak, no longer carrying the authority it once did. Your Honor, I was just doing my job. I didn't mean to offend you," Marcus interrupted, not allowing Riker a chance to make excuses. "Doing your job? Is it part of your job to humiliate, insult, and discriminate based on skin color? You didn't even bother to properly look at my identification because you believed that people like me don't deserve to step into this courtroom." Riker's face drained of color, his head lowering in shame as he tried to avoid Marcus's sharp gaze. His voice faltered with fear. "You're misunderstanding. I didn't think that. I was just following procedure." Marcus's expression hardened, his eyes full of disappointment and anger. "What procedure allows you to insult a person's dignity? What procedure permits you to use your power to racially discriminate and disregard the law? Your actions have not only insulted me, but also the very justice system that we all serve." The courtroom was plunged into absolute silence. No one dared speak out as Marcus gestured for the judicial officers standing at the door. "Officer Hank Riker," Marcus declared, firmly and solemnly, "I am officially ordering your arrest here for abuse of power and serious acts of racial discrimination. Officers, please take him away immediately." Two judicial officers moved toward Riker, who weakly struggled, his desperate eyes pleading with the colleagues who had once supported him. But now, all those who had stood by him remained silent, turning their faces away, unwilling to intervene. As Riker was escorted out of the room, Marcus stood still, his expression devoid of any satisfaction. Instead, it was a cold, resolute determination, a clear message that this was just the beginning of the fight against the injustice he had chosen to pursue to the end. As Riker's figure disappeared behind the courtroom door, Marcus let out a quiet sigh, trying to regain his composure to continue the trial. But before he could speak, a group of court officials entered through the main door, their faces tense and worried. Marcus immediately recognized the familiar faces, those who had once bowed their heads and avoided his gaze for so long. A middle-aged woman with streaks of gray in her hair stepped forward and spoke in a voice full of emotion. "Judge Monroe, we have something we need to disclose right here, something that should have been said long ago." Marcus was momentarily taken aback. He nodded slightly, signaling for her to speak. The woman took a deep breath, gathering her courage to continue. "Hank Riker is not doing this for the first time, Your Honor. There have been more than 12 formal complaints about his racist behavior and abuse of power over the years, but all those complaints were dismissed, covered up, or mysteriously erased." Marcus's brow furrowed, his heart pounding faster as he heard those words. His voice grew deeper, carrying a clear sense of gravity. Who has been behind these cover-ups? The room fell into a suffocating silence, every eye fixated on the woman. She trembled slightly, then quietly met Marcus's gaze, her eyes filled with remorse. "Your Honor, it was Judge Taryn Mahoney. He used his power and influence to prevent investigations, ensuring that the complaints were closed quickly." Marcus was struck as if by lightning. Taryn Mahoney, the respected senior judge who had mentored, supported, and helped Marcus rise in his career. He had taught Marcus valuable lessons about honesty and professional ethics, a person Marcus had always trusted and held in the highest regard. Now, that very man was behind the injustice Marcus had just endured. An image of Mahoney flashed in Marcus's mind, always wearing his distinguished black judge's robe, reminding Marcus about the importance of justice. A sense of bitterness and disappointment consumed him as he faced the truth that the mentor he respected most had been breaking the very sacred principles he had once taught Marcus to uphold. Marcus sat in silence, his expression unsettled, his heart like a storm raging inside. He had once believed deeply in the system, in the values and justice it represented. But now, he was forced to admit that this system had been manipulated by those who used their power to cover up injustice and discrimination. Marcus looked around the courtroom, where dozens of eyes were on him, waiting for a reaction from the judge who had become the symbol of this historic trial. He took a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure, then spoke each word clearly, firmly. "I thank you for your courage. From this moment on, no one will be allowed to stand above justice. Anyone involved in these cover-ups, regardless of who they are or what position they hold, will be held accountable under the law." Marcus's voice echoed clearly throughout the courtroom, like a sharp commitment, a determination to cleanse the system he had once served with all his heart. But deep within, Marcus knew that the greatest battle was only just beginning, and he would have to confront the man who had mentored him, Taryn Mahoney, to bring the truth to light, no matter how bitter it might be. Right after Marcus's decisive statement, the tension in the courtroom unexpectedly heightened as, from the defense table, Chief Attorney Andrew Bennett slowly stood up, adjusting his elegant suit, his sharp gaze fixed on Marcus. His voice rang out, calculating and deliberate, each word designed to dig deeper into the uncomfortable situation that had just been exposed. "Your Honor, we are compelled to make an urgent motion at this time. With all due respect, we believe that Judge Marcus Monroe is no longer in a position to remain impartial in this case. The events that have just transpired clearly have a profound effect on his ability to render a fair judgment." Bennett paused for a moment, quickly glancing around the room to gauge the impact of his words, then continued with more confidence, like a predator recognizing a weakness in his opponent. "Judge Monroe is a victim in a matter directly related to this trial. We request that he step down from the bench to ensure the impartiality and transparency of the entire proceedings." Marcus stared directly at Bennett, understanding that this was a malicious attack, a ploy to exploit the painful experience he had just endured in an attempt to neutralize his legal power and honor. But Marcus remained unfazed. He slowly sat up straighter, his gaze unwavering, reflecting an inner strength that could not be shaken. "I have heard Attorney Bennett's argument clearly," Marcus said, his voice calm but sharp, "and I completely understand why he has made this request." Marcus paused for a beat, his decisive gaze sweeping across the courtroom, each word flowing like molten justice from the fire he carried in his heart. "Precisely because I am a victim, because I have personally endured discrimination, I am even more qualified to preside over this case in the fairest way possible. Only those who have experienced that pain can truly understand the importance of justice and truth. That is not a weakness. It is strength, the deepest understanding of what the law is meant to protect." Marcus paused for a moment, his powerful gaze once again locking onto Bennett, making the defense attorney shift uncomfortably, slightly turning away to avoid the intensity of his stare. "If you think that the humiliation I endured will cause me to be biased," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger, resonating throughout the courtroom, "then you are mistaken. What I have just gone through has only made me more determined to ensure that no one else suffers the same injustice again." Marcus sat up straight, his face resolute, his voice steady and unwavering. "The motion from the defense counsel is denied. The trial will continue under my leadership. Remember, this is not the place for you to exploit the suffering of others to conceal your client's guilt." Suddenly, applause erupted from the audience. It began softly, then grew louder, clearly showing strong support for Marcus. Attorney Bennett quickly sat down, his face flushed with disappointment and embarrassment. His counterattack had not only been neutralized, but it had also placed the defense team in a significantly weaker position. At that moment, Marcus proved convincingly that true power did not lie in cold indifference or devious calculations. True power came from courage, sincerity, and a determination to defend what is right, qualities Marcus had clearly displayed in the midst of this crucial trial. As Marcus's powerful rebuttal ended, the atmosphere in the courtroom suddenly revived with a new energy. The applause of support that had started earlier gradually faded, but the agreement in the eyes of those present became more and more evident. At that moment, from the back of the room, an older man with a stern face stood up. His voice rang out clearly and decisively, breaking the silence that had enveloped the room. "Your Honor, may I have a word? I, too, was a victim of Hank Riker." Marcus was briefly stunned, but quickly regained his composure, nodding gently to signal for the man to speak. The man walked slowly toward the witness stand, each step filled with determination and strength. Despite his frail and thin figure, his gaze met Marcus's, and a profound understanding was shared between two people who had endured similar pain. "My name is Lewis Bryant," the man said, his voice shaking slightly but full of strength. 3 years ago, I came to this court simply to ask for an explanation as to why my daughter was wrongfully arrested by the police. Before I could even finish my question, Riker lunged at me, slammed my neck to the floor, and told me that people like me weren't allowed to raise our voices here. I had 2 broken ribs and was charged with disturbing the peace. All my complaints mysteriously disappeared. The courtroom fell completely silent as they absorbed the heartbreaking testimony. But it wasn't over. Just as Louis finished, a middle-aged woman stood up, her voice as strong as his. "I am Janet Robinson, and I am another victim of Riker. He abused his power, insulted me in front of my young daughter simply because I tried to speak out about being discriminated against by the staff here at this court. All my cries for help were ignored." One testimony after another followed, creating a powerful wave that exposed the dark, hidden actions of Riker and those who protected him. Marcus listened quietly to each account with absolute focus, his heart feeling suffocated by the painful evidence being laid bare. This trial was no longer just a simple hearing. It had become a platform for dozens of victims who had been oppressed to reclaim the justice they so rightfully deserved. The wave of outrage quickly spread beyond the courtroom, rippling through the community, and the entire nation was watching each testimony broadcasted through the news. People began to question justice, the true value of the law, and the role of those who enforce it. Social media erupted with angry posts, fiercely condemning the discrimination and injustice that the very judicial system had concealed for far too long. Marcus realized that he was not just trying one individual, he was directly confronting an entire system that had enabled, protected, and perpetuated these cruel acts. He knew the responsibility on his shoulders had never been greater. Today's trial was not just about delivering justice for himself or the victims, but about proving that the judicial system could no longer be used as a tool to protect injustice. When the final testimony concluded, Marcus silently surveyed the courtroom, a deep sense of resolve in his eyes. He softly, yet firmly declared, "Thank you to all of you who dared to stand up, who dared to tell these painful stories. Your courageous voices today will not only help us restore justice, but also help to repair a system that has been flawed for far too long. I pledge that the truth you have brought to light today will not be in vain." Marcus's words echoed powerfully, clearly affirming that this trial was a historic one that would forever end the long years of darkness that the community had endured, and serve as the first step in a bold reform journey for an entire judicial system. As the brave voices of the victims faded, Marcus slowly rose from the bench, his gaze sweeping across the faces in the courtroom with an unprecedented seriousness, strength, and resolve. He took a deep breath, his voice clear and firm, yet maintaining the necessary calm. After hearing the painful yet courageous testimonies from the victims, I have no doubt about the severity and the systemic nature of the abuses of power that Mr. Hank Riker has inflicted over the course of many years. Marcus's gaze fixed directly on the empty chair where Riker had once stood with arrogance. Now, that empty chair symbolized the collapse of a man who had exploited his power to oppress and demean the dignity of innocent people. With all the irrefutable evidence presented in this trial, the court finds Hank Riker guilty of abuse of power, human rights violations, and deliberate obstruction of justice. I hereby sentence him to the maximum penalty under the law, 6 years in prison for abuse of power, 5 years for human rights violations, and an additional year for obstructing justice, for a total of 12 years in prison. The courtroom fell into complete silence, each person feeling the weight of every word of Marcus's judgment. No one dared make a sound. All quietly witnessed this historic moment. Marcus stood there, his gaze unwavering, his voice continuing with resolute confidence. But today's case is not just the story of a single individual. It is a wake-up call about the injustices that have been hidden, about a judicial system that needs to be reformed from the ground up. It is time for us to acknowledge and change the serious issues that exist within the very system we serve. Marcus paused briefly, his voice slowing and becoming clearer as he continued to announce, "Therefore, I now announce a new reform policy, effective immediately in this court and to be expanded throughout the federal judiciary. This policy is called the Monroe Mandate, which includes mandatory training on combating racial discrimination, regular psychological evaluations, the establishment of independent oversight mechanisms to prevent all forms of bias, and the creation of absolute transparency standards in handling complaints related to discrimination." As Marcus finished speaking, the courtroom seemed to tremble with the magnitude and historical significance of that declaration. This was no ordinary verdict. It was a comprehensive change, an unprecedented commitment from someone who had endured injustice firsthand. Marcus continued, his gaze filled with determination, staring directly at the courtroom. The Monroe Mandate is not just a measure to prevent today's injustices, but it is the foundation to ensure that no one else will have to endure similar treatment in the future. From today forward, justice will no longer be a privilege reserved for a few. Justice will be the fundamental right of all people, regardless of race, color, or background. As Marcus finished his declaration, the courtroom fell into absolute silence for a few seconds before it erupted into thunderous applause, sincere and deeply emotional. Every person attending the trial today understood that they had just witnessed an important historical moment, where the man who had been humiliated right here in this very courtroom stood up, not only to seek justice for himself but to fight for the rights of all those who had been forgotten and oppressed. Marcus stood firm on the bench, a powerful sense of pride swelling within him, for he knew that from this day forward, this judicial system would never be the same. The Monroe Mandate was his legacy, the strongest commitment that injustice would have no place to hide, and that everyone deserved to be protected by real law and justice. As the applause from the courtroom had yet to subside, Marcus slowly made his way back to his private office, each step feeling like it carried an invisible weight behind it. He closed the door gently behind him, letting out a long breath, as though releasing a tremendous burden. Yet deep within his heart, he knew that the battle was far from over. Marcus slowly approached the large mirror on the wall, stopping and looking at his reflection. His hands lifted to lightly touch his freshly shaved head, the empty, rough sensation causing a sharp pang of pain once again. It was a wound not just on his body, but a deep scar on his soul, a constant reminder of the humiliation and injustice he had just endured. In that reflection, Marcus saw himself. Not the powerful, dignified judge he once was, but a man who had just endured the bitterest trial of his life. A part of him felt hollow, as though his self-confidence, his trust in himself had been severely shaken. He briefly wondered if he should conceal these wounds somehow. Could he continue to present himself in public to those who expected him to appear strong and perfect? But then, Marcus gently shook his head, his gaze becoming more determined and resolute. No, he would not hide anything anymore. These wounds were not signs of weakness or failure. Rather, they were the clearest evidence of his courage, resilience, and unwavering resolve to fight against injustice. He silently vowed to himself, from this moment on, to accept himself with this new image. He would no longer feel ashamed or inadequate, because this jagged, shaved head was a symbol of the truth, a truth that he had dared to stand up for, face, and conquer with all the courage within him. At that very moment, Marcus felt an unusual sense of liberation, a deeper pride than ever before. He knew that from now on, every time he stepped in front of others, this distinctive hairless look would always remind everyone that no one, regardless of power or status, had the right to insult or trample on the dignity of others. He adjusted his collar, stood up straight, his eyes bright and full of strength. The Marcus Monroe of today was no longer just a judge with power on paper. He was a living symbol of change, of justice, and of a deep belief in what is right. From now on, anyone who looked at him would understand that justice wasn't in the flashy exterior, but in the courage and resilience to stand up against injustice. With this thought, Marcus gave a small, confident smile and walked out of his office. On his face now, there was no trace of fear or doubt, only pride and a powerful resolve. He was ready to return to the fight, ready to be the inspiration, the guiding light for those searching for justice and truth. With the confidence and resolve he had regained, Marcus stepped out of his private office and returned to the courtroom, where all eyes were on him with admiration and respect. The image of his jagged, shaved head no longer made him feel self-conscious. On the contrary, it had become the strongest symbol of his resilience and courage in the face of injustice. In the days that followed, the powerful message from the trial and the reform policy known as the Monroe Mandate quickly spread beyond the borders of Charleston, expanding at an unprecedented pace. Peaceful protests in support of Marcus and the new policy took place everywhere, from the busy streets of New York to the administrative center in Washington, D.C., and rapidly spread to distant states. The community realized that it was Marcus Monroe who had shattered the silence that had enveloped the judicial system for so many years. Marcus was no longer simply a federal judge. He had become the living symbol of the fight against injustice and racial discrimination. The Monroe Mandate was quickly adopted by many states, and anti-discrimination training programs were launched widely. Independent oversight systems were put in place to ensure that no case of discrimination could be concealed again. Soon, Marcus's office phone rang non-stop with calls from the largest media outlets in the country, requesting interviews and sharing his journey of struggle. But the most significant call came from the White House, with a brief but formal message. Marcus Monroe would be awarded the Presidential Medal of Justice, one of the highest honors in the United States for individuals who have fought for justice and human rights. On the day of the award, Marcus stepped up to the podium in the square before millions of eyes watching. The flash of hundreds of cameras continuously flickered, but he no longer felt the pressure he once had. On the contrary, he felt a deep pride, knowing that what he had accomplished truly mattered, having touched the hearts and beliefs of so many people. As the president gently placed the prestigious medal around his neck, Marcus took a deep breath and looked toward the vast crowd with eyes full of hope and trust. His voice, warm and sincere, filled the air. "I am truly grateful and honored to receive this award. But I want to make it clear that this award is not for me alone. It is for all those who have been forced into silence, those who have been trampled upon, discriminated against, but who have courageously stood up to fight for justice and truth." His voice rang out with strength, each word carrying a profound message that touched the hearts of everyone. We will no longer be silent. We will not allow pain and injustice to continue being buried in the dark. Today, this award belongs to all of us, those who have and are fighting to make this world a better, fairer, and more livable place. The applause erupted across the square, growing louder and louder, as if it never wanted to stop. In that moment, Marcus understood that he had officially become a symbol, a beacon of hope, an endless source of inspiration for millions across the country. And from that moment on, Marcus Monroe was no longer simply a judge. He had become a symbol of courage, of the unyielding spirit of resistance against injustice, representing the extraordinary power in every person who dares to stand up for the truth. The Monroe Mandate had transcended the boundaries of a policy. It had become the flag of a comprehensive reform movement, ushering in a completely new chapter in the history of the fight for justice. From the moment Marcus stood on the podium to receive his medal, everything at the Charleston courthouse had changed completely. The silence that had once been filled with hesitation was gone, and no longer were their eyes averted from the truth. Instead, a new atmosphere had emerged, an atmosphere of courage, transparency, and pride. The staff, who had witnessed the injustices daily but never dared to speak up, had now seemingly found their voices. They stepped out of the shadows of fear, bravely speaking out about the truths that had been hidden for years. Cases that had been covered up were gradually exposed, and the people who had been hurt began to be heard and protected by the very system they had once lost faith in. Among them were those who had once stood by Riker and remained silent when they witnessed his wrongdoings. They came to Marcus directly to express their regret, offering sincere apologies for not having the courage to stand on the side of truth. Marcus received these confessions with deep understanding, knowing that it was the pressure from a system filled with people like Taryn Mahoney that had kept them silent for so long. Not only in the courtroom, but Marcus's influence spread powerfully throughout the streets of Charleston. The people no longer saw him merely as a judge standing behind the bench, but as a hero, a living symbol of courage, resilience, and true justice. Marcus's story was shared from coffee shops to small parks, from schools to working-class neighborhoods, inspiring and instilling trust in all layers of society. One afternoon, as Marcus was leaving the courthouse, he noticed an elderly woman approaching him. Her gaze was filled with affection, as if he were a long-lost relative. She gently took his hand, her voice trembling but full of emotion. "Thank you, Judge Monroe. You don't know this, but my grandson now believes that the world can change, all thanks to your courage." Marcus smiled softly, placing his hand gently on hers, deeply moved, and said, "I'm just one of many who decided not to remain silent any longer. It is you, your grandson, and all the people of this city who are the real strength behind this change." Marcus's words quickly spread, faster than he could have ever imagined. The very next day, the heartfelt gratitude appeared in major newspapers, becoming a symbol of Marcus's humility and sincerity. He never sought to be a special figure, but the way he faced and overcame challenges had made him special in the eyes of everyone. From that day forward, every time Marcus walked into the courtroom, he could feel the noticeable difference in the eyes of those around him. It was trust, respect, and a newfound hope that this system could truly change. Thank you letters and shared stories kept coming to his office, each one a reminder that what he was doing was not just a job, but a mission. More than anyone, Marcus understood that justice was not just about delivering correct verdicts in a courtroom. Justice was about profound change in people's hearts. That was the restoration of trust, the awakening of courage, and the voices once stifled now rising stronger and clearer than ever before. He smiled as he realized that he was no longer alone on this journey. By his side now was a strong, united community, filled with trust and hope, working together toward a future where everyone would be treated fairly and justly. Marcus Monroe had not only stood up to change the judicial system, he had stood up to awaken the power within every individual, reminding them that justice could never be silenced once we choose to speak the truth. Thanks to the collective strength of the people, Marcus understood that his story had now transcended the confines of a courtroom, a case, or a system. He accepted an invitation to speak at a high school in Charleston on a sunny fall morning, where the younger generation eagerly awaited to hear directly from the man who had awakened the entire city. Marcus entered the auditorium to thunderous applause from hundreds of students who were intently watching every gesture, every step he took. He smiled sincerely, standing among the young faces full of curiosity, hope, and a desire for change. After a brief introduction, a girl about 15 years old, with light curly hair and clear but serious eyes, raised her hand and asked the first question in a clear, brave voice. "Sir, after everything that has happened, do you still believe in the justice system?" The seemingly simple question caused the entire auditorium to fall into absolute silence. All eyes turned to Marcus, waiting for a candid answer from someone who had experienced the deepest injustices within that very system. Marcus looked directly at the girl, then gently smiled, his eyes reflecting sincerity and an unwavering determination. "I believe in what we can do. Change always starts with powerful and courageous questions, like the one you just asked." He paused for a moment, allowing that message to sink into the hearts of the students before continuing in a clear, warm, and powerful voice. The justice system, like all systems, is built by people, and there will always be flaws. But what matters is that we must never give up in the face of those flaws. Every time we stand up, every time we dare to ask questions, every time we speak up for the truth, that is when we are fixing the system. The girl and the other students listened intently, their eyes glowing with deep understanding, and a new flame began to burn in their hearts. Marcus looked around the auditorium once more, his voice continuing to resonate with resolve and inspiration. Justice is not just about laws written on paper. Justice is about courage, about standing up and speaking the truth, even when the whole world wants to silence you. Each one of you here can become a guardian of justice, as long as you never stay silent in the face of injustice. The atmosphere in the auditorium seemed to soften, growing warmer as those words settled in. Marcus stepped down from the podium, walking closer to the young faces, his voice becoming more intimate, more personal. "I never thought my story would spread this far, but today I stand here to say that real power lies in the hands of each one of us. You are the ones who will write the next chapters of this story. I hope you will always be brave, always ask the hard questions, and most importantly, always believe that each of you has the ability to change the world." Marcus paused for a moment before gently closing the session with a heartfelt and profound call. Spread this story. Continue to fight for a fairer, more humane society, one that always respects human dignity. Never underestimate the power within yourself, because justice cannot exist without the courage of each of us. The auditorium erupted into loud applause, the young faces shining with newfound faith and determination. Marcus stood there, smiling with pride and fulfillment, knowing that the flame he had ignited in their hearts today would burn forever, continuing to light the path toward a better and more just world. The story of Judge Marcus Monroe was not just the journey of a man standing up against injustice, but also a powerful symbol of courage and the desire for change within each of us. Marcus proved that even when facing a system filled with injustice, anyone can make a monumental difference with courage and belief in true justice. And you, what would you do if you were in Marcus's shoes? Leave a comment below to share your thoughts. If this story inspired you and made you think, don't forget to like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel to continue joining us in more meaningful stories ahead. Let's spread the power of justice and courage together.